Namaste, everyone. Namaste. Thank you, and welcome to Vichar Manthan London chapter. I am Neeti, and I'll be your host tonight. I'm extremely delighted to be here, and I hope by the end of this event, you too can share my delight. We urge you to share your experience here tonight on social media by tagging us, but please make sure your phones are on silent. So, Vichar Manthan, VM for short, is an independent voluntary organization which engages in open dialogue with members and institutions. VM explores issues facing modern British society through a Hindu civilizational lens. Vichar Manthan is a phrase in Sanskrit that literally means the churning of ideas. And what we do on this platform is we churn ideas. We don't necessarily give answers. In fact, we very rarely give answers. And you know you've had a good manthan if you leave here confused. If you leave here confused, you know you've had a good manthan. So if by the end of this event you're confused by what you've heard or witnessed here tonight, know that that's a good sign. And that's a good start to have your own manthans with your family and friends. VM is built around the idea that by earnestly exploring the toughest challenges facing British society through varying viewpoints, we can, each of us, churn out some deeper insight. VM has permanent chapters in London, Leicester, and Nottingham, as well as growing presence across Oxford, Cambridge, Birmingham, Manchester, and Edinburgh, and we are also developing VM chapters at selected British universities. Again, Vichar Manthan is a voluntary organization, so the team here, we're all volunteers and we're all professionals. And since we are a voluntary organization hosting free events, we rely on your contributions to help us keep the work of VM growing. Become our well-wisher. Support us by donating £1 or more per month through a standing order. I urge you all to go and see Pragnaji, who will be waiting outside once the event has concluded with all the relevant information regarding our Well Wishers Fund. All right, and now to the most anticipated event and topic. We will be exploring the topic of Article 370, is Kashmir now liberated or occupied? In August, the Indian government shocked the world and Indians when it revoked the famous, or as some say, the infamous Article 370, which awarded the state of Kashmir special rights. The actions of the government have caused global divisions as to the merits of the act. Was it moral? Was it legal? Was it divisive? Or was it unifying? One thing is clear. Opinions are divided. The Indian government explicitly stated as part of its manifesto that it would revoke Article 370 if given the mandate to do so. The landslide victory at the ballot box gave all the justification it needed to carry out the will of the Indian people. But many people internationally have condemned the move as illegal and immoral. Some have suggested that this is a feud about religion rather than land or politics. What are the facts? Can we untangle its complex history and multifaceted stakeholders? Let's explore this complex, nuanced challenge of our times. And moving on to our chair. Without further ado, let me introduce you to this evening's chair, Sumit Sharma. Sumit is a solutions architect for a cloud computing company and former Toastmasters president. As well as running his own public speaking workshops and business, Sumit is founder of Vani Speakers Academy. He's an active member of Vichar Manthan, and I'm sure he'll take good care of you tonight.
So thank you for joining us here at Vichar Manthan London. Like Niti has expressed, you will see on your chairs you have a feedback form. So we are interested to hear what you think about the speakers, expert witnesses, chair, venue, and facilitation. Please also let us know if there are any topics you feel that we should cover in future events, and leave your contact details should you wish to join our mailing list and hear further. You also have a question form. So Vichar Manthan is about asking those questions that otherwise would not be asked on other platforms, and we will be able to ask our expert witnesses those questions that you have asked. Vichar Manthan is about being exploratory. It's about bringing a modern-day topic onto a platform that we can discuss quite openly and ask questions that sometimes are challenging. We like to look at these issues through a dharmic lens, one that has spanned many generations, hundreds, if not thousands of years. If you think about the area in Asia, in India, and some of these lands that we have come from, we have vast history of social, political, economic, educational challenges, been through a fair amount. And so to take that knowledge, look at a modern issue dharmically to understand what is it, what's going on here. The removal of Article 370 has to be one of the most significant changes in the new world. If we look around the world, lots of things are happening, lots of changes, mammoth changes, politically, educationally, and through this geopolitical landscape, the old world order as we see it is beginning to crumble. It's beginning to show cracks. So we here as an audience today are about to unpick this topic. And like Niti mentioned, if you don't go away with more questions, VM has not done a great job. Myself, looking at the news, I'm even more perplexed, even more confused by what's going on. Is the news broadcaster I've tuned into giving me a real narrative? Is it fake news? Is it one that's biased? And through all of this hyperbole and through all this nuanced complexity, we don't really know what the truths are. And so today, with my two expert witnesses, we're going to try and unravel that. So first, I will introduce you to Vinodji. Vinod Tikku is a digital IT leader and a community activist based in London. He's actually a Kashmiri Hindu himself. He's also associated with the Kashmiri Pundits Cultural Society, who is seen as a leading voice for Kashmiri Pundits in the UK. So Vinodji, if you would like to give your opening remarks, and then we'll move on to Amitji. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumitji. Before I start, I'm going to recite a small hymn, and I'll request all of you to say it after me. Namaste Sharda Devi, Kashmir Mandal Vasini. Now the reason I say this hymn is because we are in a college campus, and Sharda Devi, which is a roop of Saraswati, is the goddess of knowledge and education. And Kashmir in our Sanskriti was looked upon as the center of education and excellence. And therefore I wanted to start with that hymn. Thank you, Sumitji, for my introduction. Yes, I've been living in London for the last 14, 15 years. I come from Jammu and Kashmir. I was born in Kashmir Valley, brought up in Kashmir Valley. And I'm the sort of first-hand witness of what happened in the region of Jammu and Kashmir, and specifically Kashmir Valley, in early 1990s. And we'll talk about that in more detail as we progress through the evening. So to start with, every time we talk about Kashmir, although the region as we know it, as you see it on the map, is actually Jammu and Kashmir, right? We talk about the regions Jammu, we talk about the region Kashmir, which is primarily Kashmir Valley, which is that white bit in the middle that we talk about a lot, but is probably only 15% of the landmass of the region. And then there is the Ladakh region, which also includes territories of Aksai Chin and Shaksgam, which have been handed over to China in the last decades. When you look at the population aspect of Jammu and Kashmir, you see that the distribution of population is around 55% population from Kashmir, 43% Jammu, and about 2% Ladakh. But when you look at it from a geography point of view, the story is completely different, right? Ladakh constitutes 58% of the landmass of the region, Jammu 26%, and Kashmir 16%. Now, when we drew up this map with the percentage split, it also includes the areas which currently are under the Pak occupied territories, which is the green bit there on the left-hand side. And the areas, the prominent areas there are the Mirpur which is linked to Jammu. Muzaffarabad more geographically aligned with Kashmir, and then northern territories of Gilgit and Baltistan. So this map essentially came into its being in this form in 1846. And essentially what happened in early 1800s was when, because of the tyranny of the Afghan rulers, a gentleman called Birbal Dhar went to Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was at that time leading the Sikh conquests in the north, and asked him to do something about the minority communities, and including Hindus and Sikhs. Maharaja Ranjit Singh sent a little force, a small cavalcade to deal with that menace, and that essentially put the stepping stones of, formed the stepping stones of starting of the Maharaja Ranjit Singh's the Sikh rule, and then subsequently in 1846, Maharaja Gulab Singh, who was one of the prime sort of soldiers in his lead soldiers in his battalion, he became the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, between 1846 and 1947, this map evolved, starting with Kashmir and Jammu, which had their own separate histories before this. Kashmir shared some of its history with Ladakh and Tibet historically, but Jammu had its own independent history before 1819 or so. But after 1846 up to 1947, this area evolved, and with the conquests of Maharaja Hari Singh and his soldiers, they were able to annex the territories up to Gilgit-Baltistan. The reason I mention this backdrop also is that now coming to 1947 and the events that led up to essentially the accession of the Jammu and Kashmir state to India, and subsequently what happened in 47 where the tribals raided Kashmir area and in fact parts of Jammu as well, and illegally sort of occupied certain territories which have now become Pakistan occupied territories. From that point onwards, lines were drawn on this map, and those lines exist till today. These lines are now in today's parlance known as lines of control, and these have evolved between 47 and now, in the sense that between 47 and now India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars and a number of other minor to medium skirmishes over the topic. And there are certain territories which have been handed over to China also in between. Now with this sort of backdrop and context, I sort of fast forward to late 1980s. This is 1988-89, and as you would know, that the Afghan-Russian war was sort of drawing to a conclusion. The Russians lost that war in a bad way, and the Afghan and the Pashtun Mujahideen, who were working alongside America and Pakistan ISI, essentially were becoming available, were becoming free in that sense. And the other thing that was happening was there was an uprise in Bosnia as well. There was a sectarian uprise in Bosnia in that period. And the third dimension was that India in 1989 was also going through its own internal turmoils as well. So we had a prime minister who had got the highest ever mandate in 84. He lost the elections very badly. And in India, we had a coalition government, and there was also an uprising, internal uprising with respect to the reservations called Mandal Commission, which led to a lot of riots in India in various towns and cities. Now, the reason these contexts are important is because Pakistan, having been defeated in the 1971 war and being humiliated, they were waiting for an opportunity when all these geopolitics sort of comes together and when India is at its weakest, and when can they strike back, and in their own words, as they say, Kashmir being the unfinished agenda of partition from their perspective, how they can take that revenge. So that is sort of the context of how between 1989 and 1990, a certain strategy was mobilized, which was originally actually strategized by General Zia of Pakistan. It's called Operation Topak. And it was put into operation, and it had 3 dimensions to it. And the theme was bleed India by 1,000 cuts. That was the theme of that strategy. And what were the 3 dimensions? The first dimension was the military dimension. Wage a war in the name of jihad, bring all these Pashtun tribals, bring all these Afghan tribals, assist them with arms and infrastructure, and also use the Bosnian situation and use the religious situation in Kashmir to try and indoctrinate people into jihad, into violence. So that was the first dimension, and the idea was that that will be a massive blow to India, and they may drive mileage out of it. Obviously, what they didn't realize, Kashmiris in general were not a fighting race, so they faced a lot of challenge with local militia in that sense. Indian army was a very much more disciplined force. The terrain was different. There were not that kind of support system. And then there were various factors. What was the second dimension? The second dimension was, well, we'll wage the military option, but we'll also look at, let's set up an umbrella network. An umbrella network called Hurriyat Conference was set up. And the idea was people who do not believe in the idea of India in that region, bring all of those political activists together, create an umbrella, and then use that as a mechanism to drive mobilization, radicalization, use the mosques, use the madrasas, and use every resource available along with the money, illegal money transfer, to help the first dimension. Now again, it sort of over the years fell flat because they had infighting, they had their own issues and all those kind of things. And then we come to the third dimension, and this is the most lethal dimension. And why I had to, call out all of these things was that it sort of helps with the context of 370. The third dimension was India as a democracy, right? Why don't we misuse that mechanism? So all our overground workers in Jammu and Kashmir, all those political families or all those political activists who have some kind of sympathies with, whether it's a religious sympathy or it's a sympathy with that idea, fanciful idea of azadi for a state, bring them together, get them to fight elections, get them to participate in the Indian democratic process, and then use the system or manipulate the system to propagate soft separatism, to ensure that those elements or those forces which need to be curbed are unaccountable. If a terrorist is killed, allow huge demonstrations, allow their funeral processions to be held. Send terrorists, don't put them in jail, keep them out of jail. So those kinds of strategies, and then obviously, use the government machinery to soften the stance of the state. Now this is the most important aspect, simply because Article 370, when it was set up in 49 and then further sort of strengthened in 54, the idea at the time was to facilitate integration of Jammu and Kashmir on the back of instrument of accession with India, and it had an idea of devolution as well. Although it was a temporary article, there was an idea of devolution as well, which means other than the finance, the communication and defense, state will have some powers to make their laws. But because some of these overground workers in these families, they became part of the system and they were propagating soft separatism, they misused this article to create a situation in Kashmir where it could never integrate properly with the rest of the region. And when I say Kashmir, it's always Jammu and Kashmir as a region. So that was sort of the narrative. Now I think to today's topic, I think there are 3 or 4 questions here. Are we liberated after 370 abrogation, or are we still occupied? So from a geography point of view, if you look at the international boundaries point of view or line of control point of view, nothing has changed. It has been a pen and paper exercise within the constitutional framework of India, through which these articles have been amended, abrogated, and the reorganization of state has taken place in consent with both the houses of the parliament.
Okay, Vinodji, do you think we could sum up your opening remarks?
Yeah, last one. Yeah, and in terms of challenges, I think the only thing I would say is that we should not make any mistakes that everything is solved and hunky-dory. There are challenges. Having said that, I think this is a step in the right direction. It will facilitate the integration of the state with the country much better, and it will also allow the Indian democracy and Indian laws to play their role in that region much more constructively. And we'll obviously take up more as we go along in our questions. Thank you.
So our next expert witness is Amitji Tiwari. He leads the UK arm of the Jammu Kashmir Study Centre, lives in London with his family and works in the financial sector, and has spoken on JKSC at many various conferences around the same topic, and looks to disseminate key facts that we understand with J&K. And I believe you're leading the London JK Hall. So opening remarks, please, Amitji, for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Vinoji. You've just eaten 2 minutes of mine, so I'll have to keep it a bit concise. It's all right if I speak from here?
That's fine.
All right. So I think it's an interesting topic, but it's a bit unfair to look at it purely from a India angle and an Indian constitution angle, right? Because everyone's aware the actions and the role played by Pakistan, and it continues to play at the moment. So I think we need to step back and understand the roles, the responsibilities, as well as the objectives from the Pakistani side. Now, if we were to look at if you can you bring the map up again?
Yeah,
It'll
sure.
quite help. So the green part, which is Pakistani occupied Kashmir, or what they like to call it themselves as Azad Kashmir. If we were to go back in history and see what's the political party out there which has governed the most, the name which comes up is All Jammu and Kashmir Muslim Conference. Now, what's the history of this All Jammu and Kashmir Muslim Conference? So, if this party was formed in 1932 by Sheikh Abdullah, Yasin Shah, the Mirwais of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, Mirwais is, they are the kind of people, the priests, and they're from the priest lineage, and to provide the Islamic education. And that's specific to Jammu and Kashmir, if I'm not wrong, Vinod, right? And third person was Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas. In 1939, Sheikh Abdullah said, I want to change the name to All Jammu and Kashmir National Conference, because this will let people in Jammu and Kashmir who are not Muslims join it and vote for the party. Keeping this in mind, this incensed the other two. Now, Yasin Shah, the Mirwais, had graduated from the infamous Darul Uloom of Deoband, the same school which has created the Taliban, the school of thought, the ideology which has helped Taliban become what it is today. So Yasin Shah and Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas broke away in 1941 and created the Muslim Conference. Now, in academic books, what they have written is Jammu and Kashmir Muslim Conference. It was called the Muslim Conference. Fast forward to 1947. In 1947, we know what happened with the India Independence Act prior to that. India got its independence. Pakistan was born, did not get its independence. It was born in 1947. The first war between India and Pakistan started on the 27th of October 1947, when the instrument of accession was signed on the 26th, and India sent its troops to defend its own territory of Jammu and Kashmir. It fought back the militia and the people but the area which we could not get back is now called the POJK, and since then is called the LOC. In 1949, a Ministry of Kashmir was formed under the Pakistani ministry, right? So it's called the Ministry of Kashmir. They signed an agreement with Sardar Ibrahim Khan, who became the first president of Azad Kashmir with Ghulam Abbas, three constituents of it. In that, it was called the Karachi Agreement. In the Karachi Agreement, what they also decided and signed was Gilgit and Baltistan, which you see on top, it's Gilgit, and it's probably one of the biggest parts of POJK. In fact, almost I would say 80% of POJK is Gilgit and Baltistan, which would be separate, and it's seceded under the control of official Pakistan. So it's not part of AJK anymore. So AJK is just this small part starting from Muzaffarabad down to Mirpur and little parts of Poonch in the occupied area. That's what they call AJK, Azad Jammu and Kashmir. It's a very, very small, tiny strip. This agreement was hidden from the common people of Pakistan as well as AJK and India. It only came to light in 1990s when the courts of Pakistan allowed it to be released. There was a secret agreement done. Now, this agreement was actually illegal. It had no locus standi, because at the end of the day, Pakistan did not have any legal document or a legal claim over Jammu and Kashmir, while India had the instrument of accession to prove its legality, which United Nations has confirmed. United Nations, under Section 39 of the peace resolutions for the ceasefire in 1949, called Azad Jammu Kashmir area. That territory did not have any sovereignty. It's not a province of Pakistan. It's only going to be a territory which can be utilized for ceasefire purposes. So next time when someone says Azad Jammu Kashmir, remember that. That's what United Nations Resolution number 39 has said categorically. So the first war between India and Pakistan, where Pakistan invaded the Indian territory to claim Kashmir, ended in a disaster for Pakistan. The second time, they tried that in 1965, which was called Operation Gibraltar. Now in 65, in 1963, they also went and seceded that part, if you see on top right in purple, to China. Now, what was happening in 1960s? China in, I think, end of 50s had just become part of Security Council, the P5. In 61, China and India went to war.
I'm gonna do just 1 minute.
62, apologies, which was unfortunate in Indian history, 1962. And they had just taken over Tibet, China. Now, they had this fantastic plan to create connectivity from the Uyghur region to Tibet, Xinjiang region, which is on top north, to Tibet, which is on the eastern side of the map here. Now, the only thing coming in the middle was that the area which was in that color purple, that's when they went to Pakistan and said, we want that area. And Pakistan has given that area to them illegally. So they didn't have it. Then they decided to give it. So you are stealing something and you're giving it to the next thief, right?
Okay. I'm going to wrap up.
Sure. So, okay, I'll skip some parts, but just the question is it liberated or occupied? I would say it's liberating. It's liberated not just for the people of Jammu and Kashmir, but it's also going to liberate entire Pakistan. We can explain why.
So I think thank you for going through some of the history and telling us lots about what's happened. It's been quite heavy. So now I think as a chair and expert witnesses, we need to assume our audience doesn't know all of the details. And so success will look like someone that comes here that has no idea what Article 370 was about to go away with some type of idea. And so you, the audience members, will be the true judge of that. And when you give us your feedback later, we'll understand how good of a job we've done or not. So I think we'll go straight over to Amitji to ask, Article 370 has been removed now. What does Pakistan think about that? How has it impacted them and the wider community?
I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Pakistan's history, they could not protect their own constitution. They're trying to protect India's constitution. They took over their own, they broke down the democracy in their own country. I think 4 times they had a military coup. But now they're trying to gear up to protect India's constitution. Now, how ridiculous is that, right? They kept on harping on Kashmir banega Pakistan, Kashmir banega Pakistan. But at the same time, they keep on saying, Kashmir azad hai, Kashmir ko azadi chahiye. Now they need to decide, Kashmir banega Pakistan ya Kashmir azad hai. I think they've got enough demons in their closet where, they just don't go together. I mean, Kashmir banega Pakistan ya Kashmir azad banega. They need to first decide which version they want to stick to before lecturing India.
Okay. And so, coming from the region, are those sentiments the same? Do you feel that the people in Kashmir are feeling the same way, or do they have a different narrative?
So I think to answer that question, we also have to bear in mind that there has been some sort of restrictions in the region at the moment. So you're not hearing all the voices from the region. But in general, I think the perception from when you start looking at the map and look at the Jammu region, Ladakh region, and parts of Kashmir Valley, it's loud and clear that for 70 years there has been underdevelopment, there has been lack of transparency, minority rights have been affected. So from all of that perspective, I think this is a welcome step. And the second thing is that Jammu and Kashmir, from a geopolitics point of view, has remained in a bit of a stalemate, right? There is a Pakistani position, there is an Indian position, there is the truth somewhere in the middle, and then there is China. It's the first time after 70 years where, without using any weapon, without waging a war, a pen and paper exercise has brought so much of interest, generated so much of interest and chaos as well. From that perspective, I think it's very interesting, it's welcome. We still need to hear from some sections within the Kashmir Valley, specifically some Muslim communities, especially if I have to go down into detail, the Sunni communities of South Kashmir and Srinagar, where there has been some dissatisfaction over the years. And I think those voices over a period of time will come. But by and large, the move is very, very positive.
So, talking about then, okay, so Kashmiris are feeling that way. I think we'll go into detail about the media blackout and the lack of communications. So if that view is coming from the Kashmiri side of things and there's yet more investigation to happen, and we've heard of what Pakistan thinks about the removal, where do you think that plays with the statement we heard earlier by yourself about the 1,000 cuts and about bleeding dry? Does that still exist? Is that still a thought process?
Yeah, a very good question, actually. See, and that's why I talked about that third dimension, which is Pakistan knows that despite being a nuclear power, they cannot have a direct confrontation with India. And the only way they could bleed India is through a proxy war and through their handlers. Now, what this decision has done on 5th of August with the abrogation of subclauses of Article 370 and the reorganization of the state, it essentially means that from an outreach point of view, from a sort of a control point of view, Pakistan is suddenly feeling disenfranchised, because all those overground workers who were using India's constitution or misusing India's constitution and the powers vested through that, they will become ineffective, and a new order will bring into being where the grassroots politics, which for the last 30-40 years has not fructified itself, that will be encouraged. Panchayati elections will be held. New leadership will be given space in the valley, and it will not be limited to those 3 or 4 families who have been driving the narrative because of their links to the deep state of Pakistan and those who do not believe in the idea of India. And I think from that perspective, I think Pakistan feels extremely disenfranchised, and that's why you hear a lot of cacophony.
And to take that one stage further, how does that play out on an international stage?
Yeah, I think from an international stage point of view, I think, again, there are 2 things here. One is the narrative about Kashmir, or the education about that region, has been, in the international media, has been quite skewed in many ways. And we as Indians also, or British Indians, have ourselves to blame in many ways in terms of the narrative around Jammu and Kashmir that we've allowed to fester because of the work certain people or certain sections of society have done. And therefore, if you ask a common man, and I was with the Met Police guy the other day, and he said there was a protest outside Indian High Commission, and there were the Kashmiri people, and then there were the Indian counter-protesters. And I said, I am a Kashmiri, and they were not Kashmiris, by the way, not all of them, even a minority percentage was not Kashmiris. So if I want to summarize that, the initial reaction from the world media when you think about human rights, when you think about the fact in today's world when we live in internet era and mobile era, the initial reaction is a bit of an outrage. But I think that does need to be balanced over time around the sensitivity of the region, the kind of conflict or the kind of war that has been waged by deep state or by external forces, and therefore what does it take for a law and order administration to counter that, to stabilize that, and bring about constitutional reforms and implement them grounds up. And that needs to be appreciated. And India has a very strong democratic framework to make that happen. And the reality is, once the dust starts settling, Pakistan keeps talking about genocide, right? And the definition of genocide is genus, side. Genus is a race, side is killing, which means when you kill races, right? Now there is no tangible evidence of races being annihilated in Kashmir or in that region. You talk about genocide in the context of what happens to Jews or what happened to Jews all around the world, or certain sort of historic evidences. None of that is happening in Jammu and Kashmir. There is propaganda, and we need to fight that propaganda.
Cool. So we're diving down into many subsections of the topic. So let's try and wrap up from the international perspective. Maybe Amarji can come in.
I think it's a very good question you're asking, because you have to look back again. I go back in history, right? So in 47 was the first war over Kashmir. 65 was the second war over Kashmir. Third war, although not was due to Kashmir, the Bangladesh war, but it did impact Kashmir. And the fourth was the Kargil war in 99. Now, all the four times, the plan was to get Kashmir, besides the 71 war. And they failed miserably. And as we have heard, from the 80s onwards, they started sending terrorists across the border, the mujahideen across the border. Sometimes even the plain army and the intelligence, deep state people disguised as freedom fighters, mujahideen, they called whatever help sell their narrative. Now, interestingly, they are on the grey list of the FATF. Now, FATF is an international organization which is tasked to ensure the black money or the terrorist funding is stopped. And Pakistan has been found guilty of doing that and has been placed on the grey list. Now, with what's happened, interestingly, if Pakistan were to do that again, send its fighters, send its proxy terrorists to fight the Indian army, they would be put on the blacklist. That's not the only reason, but there'll be surer shots to be put on the blacklist.
So there's international pressure there. There's
huge.
Some of the other.
It's on the brink of bankruptcy.
Okay.
That will destroy Pakistan.
And how do you think that's impacted by, let's say, the US are now thinking of leaving Afghanistan? So if that comes further afield, where do you think that pressure applies?
Now, again, that's we can go down that conversation, because now the recent reports are the peace talks are off. Peace talks between Taliban and the US are off. Will they restart? I don't know. Trump can change his mind.
What does the Mujahideen make of that? So US leaves Afghanistan. Where do all these armed military young individuals go?
Back to do what their leader tells them. So their leader, being sitting in Islamabad, will tell them what they did in the 90s. Fight its war for them, right? Because Afghanistan, Kabul becomes their home. They go for, they'll be, the next stop is Kashmir. There's no point. There's no doubt in my head.
I think just to qualify that a little bit, we also need to bear in mind that within the Muslim world as well, there is a lot of debate and discussion going around in terms of the future of the Islamic world and their sort of perception in the world, right? And therefore, when you talk about what is going to be the future of Taliban or what is going to be the future of these mujahideens, I think it's also going to be driven by what is going to be the direction in which the Islamic world is going to move forward from the point of view of the radicalization philosophy versus the reforms movements within Islam, which at the moment are not happening. There is a lot of we have seen some signs in Saudi Arabia and UAE where there have been talks about certain reforms and stuff. We still have to see the evidence. But I think history is when you look at history, you see that there will be an inflection point where if a religion or a movement is not introspective in nature, it leads to annihilation in many ways. And it's not about the religion in general, but those extremist and fascist movements will have their shelf life coming at some point.
Do you think they are feeling confident that they can move out of that area? So, US leaving from there, now these people, I mean, they fought off the Soviet Union, they're feeling quite strong. And if that, so there was an article that we read that says that Kashmir is becoming the front line of terrorism now. So without that education infrastructure, does that bleed still happen? And what do the people of that area think?
Yeah, I mean, there is an element of truth in the fact that there is influence. Given the fact that Kashmir has one of the highest concentration of proscribed militant organizations operating, when you look at Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Hizbul Mujahideen, all these seasoned fighters have been operating in Kashmir over the last 30 years. So therefore, there will always be an impact in that region, primarily because of two reasons. One, the Jammu and Kashmir region being a Muslim majority, the only Muslim majority state in India, and therefore it's a bit of a as you say, conquer in Pakistan's eye, because the whole idea of Pakistan or the two-nation theory that was that Muslims need to have a separate land, and therefore how can a country like India, which is a democracy, can have a Muslim majority state? So it has been bothering them from get-go, and therefore that has been their, as they say, jugular vein or sharag from the beginning. And yes, there will be repercussions, but I think with a strong leadership in our country, with the strong will, I think India is very well placed with its economic position, geostatic position, to counter all those vicious forces and come out on its own as well.
Just one point, you said they call it the jugular vein or the sharag. Unfortunately, most Pakistanis I've met, they're from Karachi, they're from Lahore, and they don't think or act or behave like Kashmir is their sharag or the jugular vein. So I think it's the Pakistan army, right? It is their sharag and their jugular vein. So without Kashmir, it's them who stand to lose, not the average person in Karachi. It's Rawalpindi and Islamabad whose sharag is at stake at the moment.
So are you implying that Pakistan needs the Kashmir issue to be there to be relevant?
The Pakistani army needs that issue to be relevant and to remain rich. It's one of the richest armies in one of the most poorest countries in the world.
There was a statement by Pakistan's foreign minister after the 5th of August events, and what he said was, we, over the last 40 years or 50 years, have managed to keep India contained and in check because we've kept the pot boiling in Kashmir, right? So we've kept 40% of your army and your strategy tied into that region. And for us, that is a bigger victory than trying to solve Kashmir in general. He didn't use that word at the end, but that's what he meant from that statement.
So slow steps and an attempt to make better of a certain land. So, Aminji, do you think if you were anti-terror, it would be safe to suffice that you're pro-India? Is India, the changes it's making, are they helping anti-terror?
Absolutely, right? So because it created an ecosystem right? That ecosystem from funding, from human resource, and an ideological fountainhead where there is an unfinished agenda, and I'm ready to kill myself and others to finish that agenda. I think most recently, last week, the chief of the army said the same thing. Kashmir is the unfinished agenda in the realization of Pakistan. So if you were to reverse that, if the Indian government or the Modi government finished that agenda, does that mean the idea of Pakistan is slowly being unrealized? If you look at it from an opposite perspective, are the strings coming off for them? Is that what they're trying to say? Is that why they're chest beating right now?
Okay. And Manoj, when you were referring to Azad Kashmir, you were using your fingers as if it was sarcastic. Could you help me understand?
I call it Gulam Kashmir, by the way.
So, Azad means free, right? Now, I've got this. This is the copy of the entire constitution of Azad Kashmir. And I made some notes. And just interestingly, I'll read a few points. No person shall be qualified for election as president unless he is a Muslim. And that's not a bad thing, but just to show how it's an unfinished agenda of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan to ensure Azad Kashmir is there as its mirror reflection. No person, it's here in this constitution, no person can hold a government office or a job if they don't swear alliance to Pakistan, to the area of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, what they call Azad Kashmir, joining Pakistan. So if you're a political party which wants Azadi, complete Azadi, you cannot stand for elections, you cannot get a job, you cannot get any government post in Azad Kashmir. Now, that's a very funny notion of Azadi. Don't you agree?
Yeah, so the concept doesn't actually exist from either side. Are they being misled? Is that a story?
It's actually they have put in laws. It's not just a notion. They have put in laws to ensure the people of occupied Kashmir on that side, POJK, sorry, are constantly under this perception that they are free, but their duty is to free the people from the other side of the LOC, right? And they have not got jobs in return. They have got no infrastructure. Their economy is non-existent, just like Pakistan's. So what exactly is Azadi?
Yeah. So I think to qualify that a little bit more, after the 5th of August events, I have some Pakistani friends or colleagues as well, and we have a little WhatsApp group where the banter keeps going on. And the first statement which somebody sent to me was, India occupies Indian occupied Kashmir. So I did laugh for a little while. So India occupies Indian occupied Kashmir. And the reason I'm mentioning this also is on the back of what Amit ji says. Do we ever say Azad Great Britain, Azad France, independent France, or do we call nations by those names, Azad Germany? So the idea here is that you have to sell that idea, the Indian occupied Kashmir and Azad Kashmir. And I think that is the propaganda which has been driven down decades in that region by the deep state of Pakistan. And I always am cautious to say deep state of Pakistan because I think it's a very fancy term and used quite in academic debates, and I happen to be in an academic center, so I'll say by the Pakistani deep state. And by using those qualification criteria, you create a notion where people whose education level is less than 5% of the population, who do not really have even internet access normally as well these days for the last 70 years of being with Pakistan for vast majority of the region, for them to feel reassured that we are Azad despite, being Ghulam in many ways.
And in terms of governance, it's run by the Council of Kashmir. Now, the Council of Kashmir has, the head of that is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, right? It's run by the General Secretary of Azad Jammu Kashmir, which is appointed by Pakistan. It has to be a Pakistani. Sure. They can remove the Prime Minister of Azad Jammu Kashmir, Azmat Kashmir, when they choose.
Right, so it's free bait. And to your point, I think sort of British-occupied Ireland, British-occupied Gibraltar might be a fair statement to make. Okay, so we've talked and we've delved quite a lot on the past, and I'm aware Article 370 happened quite recently, so we want to go into what this means and how things change. And actually an opportunity now for the audience, if you haven't already written a question down, please write it now. We have ushers that will be collecting them very shortly. So we won't be taking a break as such, so please write them down, and if you have a question, please raise it so the ushers can come collect them from you. So let's move now into present day. Now that Article 370 has been removed, what does that mean for Kashmir on a local level? What's happening there? Are demographics changing? Are educational establishments ready and open? What's the medical facilities looking like? What does present day Kashmir look like?
Right. So before I answer that question, can I spend 2 minutes on Article 370 per se, the whole process of abrogation, right? Given we have quite an engaged audience, I just wanted to mention a few points. So when we say Article 370 has been abrogated, there are 2 or 3 things we need to bear in mind. The first thing is the Article 370 itself has not been abrogated. Article 370 has a number of clauses, and there are sub-clauses of Article 370 which have been amended/abrogated. So that's the first thing. The second point is, which is less known and is not even in the media much, which is there is an article of Indian Constitution called Article 367. And it's the craftiness of this legislation, how changing one line in Article 367 has actually enabled to make Article 370 toothless in many ways. And the reason I wanted to talk about this was to also educate our audience, because they go out and they speak to people. So Article 367 has a clause which says that with respect to Jammu and Kashmir, if there is any amendment and abrogation, it should be done in consultation with the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, like other constituent assemblies, were formed in late 40s after India's independence. These bodies would form the laws and outline how these states will integrate with India. And the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir was abrogated, as it was dissolved in 1956, right? So therefore, theoretically speaking, it would have been impossible to abrogate Article 370 in many ways if you look at it from a technicality point of view. And therefore, logically, what has been done is the definition of Constituent Assembly has been changed. A word has been added that Constituent Assembly can also be referred to as Legislative Assembly. And Legislative Assembly is the modern equivalence of Constituent Assembly after these states have merged into India. And therefore, the due process with respect to the amendment of these articles with the presidential order in concurrence with the state authority, which is the governor of the state, who's the head of the Legislative Assembly, was followed. And this amendment was made, and that enabled Article 370 to be amended in its sub-clauses like 35A and Para 2, 3, and 4 to be amended, which has allowed for the special status to be removed and allowed Indian laws, some of the Indian laws which were earlier not applicable to the state, to facilitate those laws to be applicable to Jammu and Kashmir. So that I really wanted to add that point here.
No, and thank you for that. And so now implemented, and now the ability to implement and protect and bring in laws and legislation, how does that change for the people that live there?
Absolutely, yeah. So what do these changes mean? The first thing that it means is with Article 370 in place and its subclauses 35A, it gave special status or privileges to the residents of that region, which therefore meant, despite Jammu and Kashmir being part of India, any Indian, if they would want, any Indian who has been working in Jammu and Kashmir for last 30, 40 years, for example, if there is a Muslim teacher from Allahabad who has been teaching in Kashmir in a madrasa from 1960 onwards, and he's got married and he's got kids and everything else, he still cannot settle down in the state. That was the problem with Article 370. If there was a female from Jammu and Kashmir who went out for work or whatever and got married outside Jammu and Kashmir, she would lose the rights of inheritance for her kids and her husband and all those kind of things. Therefore, there was a restriction with this article in place that the principles enshrined in freedom of people and movement, which we vouch by, were restricted by this. So I think abrogation of these clauses...
But now removed?
Now removed, that means that Muslim chap who's been teaching for 40 years in Kashmir can buy land there, can settle there, can think of his next generation there. And that lady who came to London and married some British guy, his children can still have inheritance rights to property back home in their ancestral land, right? So these are some of the very top level, but there are a lot of other benefits which this abrogation brings in. For example, in 1947 when partition happened, right? A lot of people from Lahore and other parts of Pakistan came to India and they became legal residents of India. Some of them even went up to become deputy prime ministers of this country and whatnot. And obviously on the other side, people who went from here to Pakistan, they're still called muhajirs, which is a different story. But in Kashmir, there was a very similar challenge. The refugees which came from Western Pakistan into Jammu and Kashmir, they till now don't have the right to settle there, or they cannot contest elections, council elections, they cannot get government jobs and stuff like that because of this restriction, because they were not inherently from Jammu and Kashmir.
So now they're able to, so there's more equal rights for minority groups, absolutely, for women,
absolutely,
the property laws. Yeah. And what about human rights? Because on a global stage, you look at the media that's been propagated and or fake news, you get to be questioned. Yeah. Is the big question mark around human rights?
So I think with respect to human rights also, I think from a legislation point of view, with these changes, there are about 106 laws which are enshrined in Indian Constitution, applicable to all the regions, all the states in India, like equality, so gender equality rights, minority rights, freedom of expression, right to information. All these different laws were not applicable in Jammu and Kashmir because of this. So from a human rights perspective, it does bring that semblance in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. For example, child marriages in Jammu and Kashmir were still legal because of 370, because there was no provision around child marriages. Now, from an Indian Constitution point of view, child marriages are a criminal act. And I think these are these nuances, about 106 odd laws which now are benefited. Obviously, what we are also talking about is this interim period where to manage this change, this historic change, there are some restrictions in place in certain regions, and they are also not, when we look at the genocide definition, it's not that a particular race has a restriction. The entire region of Jammu and Kashmir has had restrictions. Mobile phones were off in entire region. It's a multicultural, multi-ethnic region. You got Buddhists, you got Hindus, you got Gujars, Bakarwals, Shia, Sunnis. So all of them have faced the same sort of difficulties, and slowly and steadily restrictions are being removed. And
so
it's
just to dive
process.
into that, and I've seen, again, on international level, the blackout, for example. Some say that's a bad thing. What are you hiding? What's going on? Why would the media blackout be of importance? Why was that carried out? Maybe you can...
Yeah, I think from a blackout point of view, we have to look at both dimensions. When we say blackout, essentially we are talking about restrictions on internet and mobile phones primarily in today's world, right? And the primary reason for the blackout was what would happen in Kashmir on a normal average day before 5th of August, right? There would still be violence on the streets, right? India was still dealing with counter-insurgency. India was still dealing with insurgency. It was also still dealing with cross-border terrorism. And it was also dealing with radicalization to some extent in around 3 or 4 districts of the state. Now, what internet enables to do is it facilitates that communication between the radical elements in the deep state.
Encrypted applications.
Encrypted application, that is one. Second is mobilization of the crowds. All this stone pelting business which has been going on in Kashmir since 2008, that is, it uses social media as a vehicle, as a tool for crowd mobilization in areas where there is either an operation going on or if there is any such activity going on. And therefore, that was the prime reason to ensure that the vested interests who have nefarious designs don't cause any kind of situation where there is loss of life, and even for those political activists who are detained, their life also needs to be preserved. And if for any reason some of them are caught in the situation, then the blame will again be on the government in terms of what we've done to protect their lives. Yeah. So the protection of life and limb is priority one. Blackout is a temporary phenomenon, and over a period of time
the process
it will be eased.
And one line I'd like to add on that is, so prior to 5th of August, if you heard the media narrative, they would say, our human rights are abused in Kashmir. It's only via 370, it's due to 370 which is keeping us with India. And now they're saying our human rights are being abused because 370 is gone.
So when 370 was in place, was it constitutional?
What do you mean by what?
Did it go against constitution while it was in place?
It's not such a black and white answer, right? Sure. It was put in for various historical reasons prevalent between 1947 and 1956. We can spend half an hour discussing what happened during those 8 years and why it was put and what role did Sheikh Abdullah play, right? It's very important to understand the role Sheikh Abdullah played in the 1950 and how certain individuals played a power game. And some of the names are Sheikh Abdullah, Nehru, and Sardar Ibrahim Khan, and even Lord Mountbatten. I don't want to go into more, but please research. There are lots of information out there, documents, books, empirical studies done on these four individuals and the roles they have played to understand the mess which they left for this generation to deal with. Now, the narrative by certain groups are, we are under threat due to 370. After 5th August, the same group says, bring back 370, we are under threat. I mean, they are contradicting themselves. So either they support the accession to it, so they are fighting to uphold the Indian Constitution. That's quite heartening to see, because previously they were fighting against the Indian Constitution, right? So it just doesn't make logical sense.
And when these came into place, the demographics of the area, I presume, were very different to how they are now. Could you help the audience and myself understand the demographic change of the land that we're talking about?
I think Vituji can do a better job.
So, two things. One is, see, they say democracy is a battle of ideas, right? From a democracy point of view, the principles behind Article 370 are fascinating in many ways. Despite the fact that it was a temporary and transitional provision in our constitution, it does sort of encourage the idea of devolution to some extent. And in some modern democracies, that can be seen as a fascinating idea. I mean, when you look at Scotland and some other devolved sort of democracies which are part of United Kingdom, it can work. And these experiments are much more successful when there is less interference from non-state actors, right? Now, having said that, what has happened in Jammu and Kashmir between 1940s and now, if we take the example of the Kashmir Valley, at the time of partition of India, the population of the Kashmir region, the Hindu population or the minority population, including Sikhs, was around 12%, right? That today, after the ethnic extermination of 500,000 Kashmiri Pandits, Hindus in 1990 from Kashmir, has reduced to less than 1%, right? So that is one change. The second change is that within the Pakistani occupied territories, the Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, and rest, there has been a conscious influx of the Punjabi diaspora into that region to change the demography of that region. And therefore, that the pre-47 situation doesn't exist anymore there, right? And then I've also talked about the fact that there were 1947, because of partition, there was a lot of movement of people who were oppressed by violence.
There was lots more going on in the area at the same time.
And when you start looking at the UN resolution, and I think UN resolution 39 and 47, which are most significant, they talk about this. They say there are 3 prerequisites. One is Pakistan to remove its army completely. Second is India to maintain as many forces, limited forces to maintain law and order. And then a plebiscite commission to be set up, which will ensure that the demographic situation is restored to the pre-47 state, and then they will talk about plebiscite, and the plebiscite is also to discuss the question of India versus Pakistan. Now, this is an interesting one because people here talk about self-determination and all those kind of things, and they talk about the concept of Azadi, and some of these very literate, extremely literate Pakistanis, if they go and read these resolutions on the UNSC website, the third prerequisite, when it's met, although even the first one was not met, it only talks about plebiscite, not self-determination, and there is a nuanced difference on the question of India versus Pakistan. And the concept of an independent Jammu and Kashmir never existed. So that's something also to bear in mind.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think this whole word plebiscite is played a lot out in the media. What people don't question and understand, or are aware rather, is that's, as Vinodji said, number 3. Number 1 is for Pakistan Army to remove all its forces from the area, and all the people who are not part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir prior to 1948, then only can section number 3 take place. Not just that, if I'm not wrong, there was an amendment, a further clause to this whole act, for it to revert back to 1947 status. They need to take back the part they gave to China. Now imagine Pakistan going to China and saying, give us that portion back. Good luck with that.
Okay, let's bring this a little bit more into this country where we live, earn and pay taxes. How do you think this affects UK? So we've got Indians, Pakistanis living together harmoniously in Britain. This incident takes place, Article 370 is removed, and all of a sudden everything goes crazy here in the UK. Why and how do you think that effect has taken place?
I'm tempted to take that question, if you don't mind. And I think this is one of the most important questions which we need to address here. Indian and Pakistani communities, by and large, despite the geopolitical situation back home, have lived in relative peace in this country. But this particular situation has created a lot of strife. And one of the things which I've observed is that a lot of these communities who are in a state of sort of outrage, and they are coming out in the streets and they are talking about the human rights of people of Kashmir that have been violated, and they call themselves Kashmiris. The first thing I ask them always, and they always fail in that test, is when I look at that mob and I ask them, are you a Kashmiri? And the guy says yes. And I ask him, okay, if you are a Kashmiri, do you know Kashmiri language? And he doesn't know the language. Now that is not to say that the people who come in those crowds do not sympathize with Kashmir, or they may belong to the wider region of Jammu and Kashmir, but the way they propagate this propaganda by saying they are Kashmiris, please be informed that 99.2% of the British Kashmiri diaspora are actually not Kashmiris. They do not speak the Kashmiri language, they do not eat the Kashmiri food, they do not sing the Kashmiri songs, and they could not wear the Kashmiri outfits. So that is a very important thing to bear in mind. Now the second question is human rights. Now from a human rights point of view, I think it's very, very important that irrespective of what happens 4,000, 5,000 miles away, and there are a lot of challenges, be it in Hong Kong now in today's world, or be it the strife which is in Syria, Afghanistan, or there are challenges within the subcontinent. The country which you adopt and make your home, if you believe in human rights, it starts from your home, It goes to your communities, it goes to your places of work where you study, and with your ecosystem. And if you believe in human rights, you will follow human rights principles in all of these spaces. And what we have seen on 15th of August, what we have seen on 3rd of September, is by no figment of imagination, an example of people who would come out shouting about human rights of people, because none of that crowd actually believed in human rights when they were throwing projectiles at people or when they were shouting Modi Kutta and other things, and then they were saying India, death to India and all those kind of things.
There was damage done to...
And there was damage to property.
And 4 people were arrested.
And in our culture, because we were talking about dharma, in our culture we say, you fix the problem from home first. If you can't fix yourself, you cannot fix anybody else. So for those who are talking about human rights of people of Jammu and Kashmir, please first work on the human rights within your homes, within your cities, communities, and then talk about human rights.
The 4 that were arrested, the coaches that arrived to protest. So you have a right to protest, and the projectiles and the damage is, of course, not what a civil community would be exhibiting. So clearly it's quite important to people in the UK. You know, where do they feel? What do they feel about this? What does the Indian diaspora here, or even the Muslim community? Is this a good move for them?
There are a lot of people I've met, civil activists from the Pakistani occupied side who live in UK, who understand the facts, who are aware of the role the Pakistani army has played and continues to play. Unfortunately, their voices don't get the support and the traction which is required. It's important for people like these to come up and speak to their own community, because it's their community. So when people say, I'm from Mirpur, next time, you ask them, can you ask for Azadi and run for elections inside Mirpur? Right? Let them think about it. It's not for us to give a big helping brethren hand. It's their problem. They need to fight their problems. Ask them next time, can you fight elections for Azadi in Azad Kashmir? And let's see what the answer is. Let them do the research, because they might say, oh, fake news, oh, right wing, oh, extremist, xenophobic, blah, blah. Let them do their research and come back and discuss that.
Okay, so we're nearing the end, and I'm very aware that we haven't been able to answer all of your questions. This topic is extremely nuanced, it's deep, it carries 70 years of change from today, and then maybe 300 plus years of British colonial shadow on top. So I think both of our expert witnesses, I'm willing to give you 3 to 4 minutes each if you want to make some closing remarks, and then we'll begin wrapping down to see what our audience might have to say. If there's anything else you'd like to share. 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think when we talk about closing remarks from this session point of view, I want all of us to take away 2 or 3 things. One is that we should all be informed, and we should educate ourselves with respect to the history of that region, if we are interested in the region and what is happening in that space, and if it affects us. And I was talking before the show with one of my friends, and I said there is a nuanced definition of history. Americans, when they say something like it's history, it means forget about it, right? In our dharma, when we say history, we mean we have to learn a lot so that we can make our future better. So please don't forget the history. Don't stay immersed in it forever, but learn from it and make your future better. So that's one thing we need to learn from Jammu and Kashmir, because what the communities in that region have faced, that should not happen to anybody else. And I'm a living testament of that community where we've been uprooted. Jammu and Kashmir was our ancestral abode for 5,000 plus years. The Saraswat Brahmins of the region who went all over the world preaching education, we were uprooted from our adobe, and made to feel over the years that we do not belong and we are somehow responsible for the situation in the valley. This should never happen to any communities within ourselves or anywhere in the world. And I think that's something we've also is a message we take away from what happened with the Jews as well. So that's one. The second thing is, I think we should also remember that there have been challenges in Kashmir, in the region, Jammu and Kashmir. There will continue to be some challenges in that region for a period of time. So I think we don't also have to become extremely gung-ho about the fact that legislation has been changed and suddenly everything will be hunky-dory, right? There has to be a healing process as well. There are millions of people living in that region. They belong to different religions, castes, cultures, communities, and drawing a wedge is not a solution also. We need to do the right things, but healing, community engagement, and trust rebuilding needs to happen again. And if I talk about myself as a Kashmiri Hindu, whenever I'm asked the question, so when are you going back to Kashmir? Now Modi ji has done it, you need to go back. And my question is, go back for what? Go back to then after 30 years be prey to another onslaught in 30, 40 years when something else happens, another movement comes in? Until I see that people who threw me out of that space where I've lived for so many years, and by the way, this is the 8th migration from that valley in 700 years, until I see that justice happening in front of me, until those people or those ideology who perpetrated that violence, I see them brought to book, a judicial process followed. For me, the idea of going back, and the idea of going back is not just to leave everything and go back, it's to connect back with my roots, will remain a distant dream. So first step has been taken, but there are a few more things which need to be followed through before we can give everybody that confidence that yes, that region now is peaceful, safe, and communities can thrive in future.
Thank you for that, Vinodji. And I wish we could have gone into more detail about your actual personal story. Maybe that would be another time. Amji, he's taken one of your minutes, so
okay.
you're going to have to be quick.
I think to your point, right, Vinodji, everyone's got a right to have an opinion, but let's base it on facts. So when they have an opinion on Jammu and Kashmir, I hope people anchor it to facts which are well researched and not concocted up, right? This is absolutely, it's a travesty with Jammu and Kashmir. Most of the opinions are devoid of facts. People talk about Azad Kashmir. Think about how Azad it is. Ask them how Azad it is. In fact, I like that concept, Azadi, right? Like people have a right to be free. We are born free, we should be free. So people in Azad Kashmir, people like Baba Jan, people like Arif Shahid, they ask for Azadi. They are in jail. So next time when people talk about Azadi, ask why is Baba Jan in jail? Why is Arif Shahid in jail? In fact, he was hanged by the Pakistani authorities. Right? Ask them. They might not know. They should know. They're asking for Azadi. Thank you.
Thank you, Amji. Closing remarks there. I think we can all agree it's quite complex. We have hopefully uncovered some truths, some facts, and I think like Amitji has said, the global conversation will continue. There will be people that agree with some of the statements here today, people that disagree. And the idea of this platform is to engage both parties so that we can actually understand what's going on. What are the facts? Was it divisive? Was it moral? Was this legal? And I think some of those questions have been answered. Some of my takeaways that I've understood from here today and through the research that we've done is that this movement has been a move against the fight of terror. It is bringing some liberties and rights back into a region that didn't have it for 70 years, if not more. And just the occupation of land and how to take that back legally, morally, is not just between two states, two countries, bilateral dispute. It's a fight for democracy, in fact. And I think we didn't delve too much into China here at all, but there is another larger play there and what the West and US's influences are too. So again, the idea of Vichar Manthan is to manthan those vichars, churn those thoughts, have ideas, talk about them. Let's bring them onto a platform where we can openly discuss them and learn and grow more. We have lots more questions that we will not have time to go through. Perhaps in a study circle later with these two expert witnesses, we can uncover some of those. I ask you as an audience to think about this. When you see it on the news or fake news, when your friends and colleagues are discussing it or not discussing it, to actually see where their conversations come from. Where are their narratives born from? Are they in fact? Are they just hearsay? And do they even know what they are talking about? I've learned much through this debate, and I hope you can stick around later. Do fill out those feedback forms. And remember also that tonight here was a free event for you guys. So your contributions will go a long way in making sure we continue the work of Vichar Manthan and answering and asking the questions that you want to hear about. So please do tell us a little more. I know that there will be some naysayers that say this was perhaps a rigged event or it's only showing one narrative. It's very important to know that we reached out to many people to come onto this event tonight. Quite a lot of them declined. It was JKSC that came forward and wanted to talk more. So if there are other narratives out there that weren't expressed today or weren't shown today, then Vichar Manthan is all ears and wants to hear and bring those ideas onto a platform so that we can discuss them. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
We hope we have given you enough information and insight into taking this into your own homes, workplaces, and carrying on the Manthan in your lives. Like Sumit said, we often run events like these throughout the year, and it wouldn't be same without having our well-wishers to support us. So again, I invite you guys to attend the Well-Wishers Fund desk that is outside and get involved as much as possible. Please join me again in thanking our expert witnesses and Sumit for chairing this event with a big round of applause.